What's up, humans? What's up, Anomacon? I hope everybody's doing okay. I want to thank Mr. Ryan Sprague for allowing me to be a speaker on this year's Anomacon. Today's presentation will be sort of a letter to one of the most influential ufologists in history, a person that I deeply admire on the field, and someone whose books have made a profound impact in me. I'm talking about Dr. Jacques Valleé. There's a case that I've been following for a while, which has to do with a doctor who is also Mexican like me. His name is Dr. Jacobo Grinberg. I've done extensive work on my Psicoactivo podcast channel about his case and about his life's work. He wrote about 50 plus books about human consciousness. He's the only certified scientist in PhD level who studied Mexican shamans for decades. And he wrote multiple books about many of them throughout his career. Along this exploration of Mexican shamans, Dr. Greenberg came out with a theory called the Syntergic theory. I do have a lot of videos trying to explain it, but I think it's best if I gave you like a little preview from his own words of what the Syntergic theory is. Here's Jacobo Grinberg explaining the Syntergic theory for every one of you.
Several clarifications before starting. You said the shamanic conception of existence. And yes, I want to clarify a little what this shamanic thing is, or what shamans are. They are the indigenous wise men of many places in the world. We have studied these wise men in Mexico. One of the lineages of these people is found in the state of Sonora, the Yaquis of Sonora. And they have Carlos Castaneda, oh yes. And they have a conception about how perception is created. They are fundamentally interested in explaining, or trying to explain, how images appear, how sounds appear, how different levels of reality appear. So, in this sense, the Syntergic theory is related to this shamanic conception, but does not arise from it. It is related because this theory is also a theoretical attempt to try to explain how perception is created, but the nomenclature it uses is different from that used by shamans, although the conclusions are very similar. The Syntergic theory states that there is a basic organization of space. This basic organization would be like a matrix, a lattice, whose fundamental state is total coherence and symmetry. Contemporary physics also agrees on this. Any modification in this fundamental matrix of space is detected by a physical instrument as an elementary particle. Then the instrument detects that there is something appearing against a stable background of all total coherence. And physicists and people who know what the measurement of the instrument means talk about the appearance of an elementary particle. The idea is that lattice distortions, especially complex distortions, are what we can call objects. The Syntergic theory states that the human brain is capable of distorting the structure of the lattice in the most complex way known in the universe. And this complex distortion of the lattice constitutes perceptual reality, in such a way that each of the neuronal activities constitutes a micro-distortion of the lattice. And since the human brain contains around 10,000 and 12,000 million neuronal elements, each micro-distortion, each alteration of this basic structure of space interacts with each other, forming a complex macro-distortion that the theory calls the neuronal field. Thus, the fundamental hypothesis of the Syntergic theory is that perception arises as a result of the interaction of the neuronal field with the lattice of space. There are different levels of interaction between the neural field and the lattice, and each of these levels constitutes or is associated with or is perceived as a different level of consciousness. For example, there is auditory consciousness, visual consciousness. They are different types of consciousness. And the theory states that each of them is related to the parameters of this interaction between the neuronal field and Galatiz. Well, first, I don't understand why someone takes the attribute of judging the understanding of others. I mean, it's very strange. Second, in any creation of a theory, for the creator of the theory, the experience of creation is an extraordinarily interesting event. When the theory is created and given as a final result, the listener of the theory can consider it as a product of an intellectualization foreign to experience. But every creation of a theory, when this theory is deep, comes from experience. For example, I mentioned these indigenous wise men who are interested in explaining perception. They have a theory of perception, but this theory of perception arises from their experience. They perceive the world in a certain way that is different from the perception that other types of people have because they were born in another culture, simply because of this. And then from this perception they create a conception. The interesting thing about the conception and every specific attempt to try to understand perception is that in some way, the attempt to understand perception puts us at the foundation of any reality. In our time, one of the great dangers, one of the great pains that we are experiencing is the loss of meaning and dispersion. In other words, we often encounter people who really don't have much of an idea of who they are, nor do they have anything that helps them understand themselves and reach their center, a unification of themselves. So the attempt, for example, to explain perception is an attempt to achieve this unification, because we will be at the basis of the creation of any reality. And understanding how reality is created helps us unify. So it is not intellectualism, especially in the process of creation, because fine theory, deep theory, always arises from experience. I would like to give 2 pieces of advice, but first something very interesting. Salvador and I witnessed an extraordinary event, and come on. I am a scientist. I have a laboratory. I study brain activity, brain physiology, and they invited me to meet this Pachita woman and her operations. And what I saw there, in principle, contradicted every concept and every knowledge that I had about reality. And what that I saw taught me, that Salvador was describing it, and that I was also a witness of that. What it taught me is that I cannot say what the limit of human capacity is from that experience. I do not dare to say that the human being cannot do this. The brain has such a limit to its potential. But it would seem that we are within a very extensive continuum, and we do not know what the extremes of this continuum are. Now, the 2 tips, the 2 pieces of advice. One is laughter. Laughter is excellent. It is an extraordinary therapeutic measure. There is even a Taoist meditation technique where the person, and it is very easy to do it, the person sits and smiles. Try it. Smile with your eyes and mouth, that is, really turn your corners up. If you are in this situation, there is immediately a series of messages that our body receives, that our brain receives. First of all, everything is fine. There are hormonal secretions given by the change in physiognomy that produce an extraordinary improvement in all physiological systems. That's one of the tips, laugh. The more we laugh, the more we give ourselves good signals, the healthier we will be. And the second is observation, which perhaps in combination with laughter can be an excellent therapeutic measure. We are able to observe even what we think cannot be observed. For example, at first we think that we cannot observe our brain activity, and yet there is a Buddhist technique, Vipassana, which teaches a person who practices it to observe their own brain activity. And this is an extraordinary experience, especially for a neurophysiologist. Realizing that you have an observation mechanism that allows you, for example, to see your own brain. Not just your own brain, your glandular activity, which allows you to feel your body part by part until you achieve a unified body image. And what we know, and from these techniques, is that the fact of observing, for example, a diseased tissue, a pain, and observing it with equanimity, calmly, has a healing effect. So this is the second tip.
Okay, so the reason that I am addressing to Dr. Jacques Valleé is because there's a documentary called The Secret of Dr. Greenberg, where director Ida Cuellar talks about the life's work of Dr. Greenberg. And on that documentary, there are 2 pictures that he shows. In those pictures, one of them has, I am going to show them as we speak, one of them has Dr. Jacobo Grinberg on the right hand side of the image, and next to him are, you may recognize them, author John Keel, who famously wrote the Mothman Prophecies and Operation Trojan Horse, Dr. Jacques Valleé himself, and at the far left we have Andrea Pujarich, who is one of the most famous parapsychologists in history. So this picture is very indicative that they at least shared a table and conversed about who knows what. at a certain point. The other picture is more mysterious, even because Dr. Greenberg appears in the background. Dr. Jacques Valleé is walking alongside other researchers and investigators. One of them, I was very curious to see him on this picture. His name is Jose Juan Benitez. He's one of the most famous Spanish authors in history. He writes a series of books called The Trojan Horse, just the Trojan Horse, where he talks about time travel. And he claims that he visited the time of Jesus Christ. And he has a very wild story of what he claims to have experienced on those trips. For decades, his work has been considered fringe topics, but I find it really interesting that he was there at the same time Dr. Greenberg and Jacques Valleé were there. In August, there was an Ancient Aliens episode of Dr. Jacques Vallée's live work where they show a picture, a new one, twice, of Dr. Valleé at a conference with none other than Dr. Jacobo Grinberg right beside him. I want to know, and I want to ask Dr. Valleé, why was he photographed with arguably the most important Mexican scientist who dealt with consciousness studies and the study of shamanistic traditions? What were they doing together in those three separate occasions? So I want to ask directly to Dr. Jacques Valleé a few questions about this. I want to know, first of all, I am not accusing anybody of anything. I don't know why Dr. Jacobo Grinberg disappeared. I don't claim that I know. I don't presume to know anything. I'm not making any assumptions. I'm just following the data. I am just following these photographs and the documentary Ida Cuellar made in 2021. So I want to know what was Dr. Jacques Vallée's interest in Dr. Greenberg. The first question has to do with those pictures. Two of them, I believe, that were taken in summits in Madrid and Costa Rica. The one where Jacobo is with John Keel, Jacques, and Andrea Pujarich is supposed to be in Costa Rica. The other one where he's with Jacques Valleé and JJ Benitez is supposed to be in Madrid. My question is, what topics did you cover in those conferences, and which summit is the third photograph from, the most recent one that was shown on the Ancient Aliens episode? That is question number one. Question number two, based on your interactions with Dr. Jacobo Grinberg, what is the concept you have about his work and his personality? And what relationship did he have with you, author John Keel, and parapsychologist Andrea Pujarich, who are also in one of those pictures? That is question number two. Question number three, what do you know about the interest that three-letter agencies SRI, or perhaps the Invisible College, could have had on Dr. Jacobo Grinberg's work? What was the potential nature of this interest? Because Ida Cuellar, on his documentary, found evidence that the CIA had a program where they attract academics and scientists to work for them. And there is evidence that he was offered multiple jobs that were very well paid from American universities and potentially the CIA. So I would like to know if you have any information on that. That is question number three. Question number four, what do you know about the last experiment he was working on? It's about the transferred potential. That's what it's called. It attempts to prove Albert Einstein's famous phrase of spooky action at a distance between two human brains, regardless of how apart they were from each other. That's what the experiment was trying to prove. They proved it 70 to 80% of the times within a confined space on the same building. And when Dr. Greenberg was about to go to India to conduct an experiment through a satellite That's when he disappeared in 1994. So I'm gonna leave wherever they can share on this Anomacon conference a link to this potential paper that was never peer reviewed and some other documentation where you can find the work Dr. Greenberg did, and a link that proves that the CIA had taps on Dr. Greenberg. There are FOIA documents that came out where they proved that they had taps on him. They have some work that he did and he wrote in English. So I want to know, what do you know about this interest from either these three-letter agencies or SRI? Because we know SRI is where the Stargate program was conducted, and a lot of the work that Dr. Greenberg did is linked to the Stargate program in one way or the other. So I would like to know this information from you. That is question number 4. Question number 5, and this is a little bit more difficult to answer because I get that there's a reason his disappearance was so mysterious. There's a reason why the leading investigator, Commander Clemente Padilla, was ridiculed and was persecuted by his own government for investigating this case. If you guys can't answer me this question, I understand. I understand if there's a level of secrecy to this. My intention is to just shed light on the doctor's work, see how important you may think it is. It may not be, but I think that it is. Based on what I've read from his extensive work, I do believe that there is a lot of evidence of experiments he was conducting and he conducted for decades.
Well, it has been very interesting to listen to everyone, and I agree with Dominique. The important thing is synergy. And I would like to tell you about an experiment we did in Mexico that is closely related to some of the things that have been discussed. For several years we have been recording the activity of the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And what we did was a program with a computer where the computer received the information from both hemispheres, compared it with each other, and depending on the result of the comparison, gave a series of signals to the subjects. For example, if the waveforms of the two hemispheres were very similar, the computer gave a very low tone, a low sound. If the shapes began to be different, the electroencephalographic shapes, it gave a high-pitched sound in such a way that the subject could know through a sound feedback system the state of his interhemispheric unification, and also learn to modify the interhemispheric relations. It could, for example, decide to increase the interhemispheric correlation by moving towards the low sounds, or decide to increase the difference, the lateralization, by moving towards the high sounds. We repeated this on more than 30 subjects for 3 or 4 years, because what we wanted to know is what was the experience of unification, that is, what was happening with the psychology of the subject when his two hemispheres began to work in a correlative way. And what the subjects reported in all cases is that as the interhemispheric correlation increased and the two hemispheres came to work coherently, their sensation was that of reaching or touching an ego center, a unity, an internal state of stillness, of peace, of coordination. That is, there was an isomorphism between their subjective experience and the interhemispheric correlation. In contrast, the less interhemispheric correlation there was, the less subjects reported a sense of dispersion. They felt bad. They felt they were not in unity. Very interesting. The most trained subjects reported that when they were able to control at will the interhemispheric correlation, that is, to increase or decrease it at will, they began to feel as if they were in an existence, in a state, in an extracerebral location. That is, I don't mean that they stepped out of their body and saw their body, but that they felt that their experience was located in a place that was no longer right-left, but included both. In one experiment, what we did was to interact people who normally remain in a state of high interhemispheric correlation. All of us have oscillations in our interhemispheric interaction. There is, unless we are veteran meditators, no state of continuity in the interhemispheric correlation. We oscillate. Sometimes there is more correlation, sometimes there is less correlation. We have patterns of interhemispheric correlation that are surely associated with these states of identity or non-identity, of unification or non-unification. So what we did was to interact subjects that were at different levels of correlation, and what we observed, similar to the transferred potential experiment, is that the subject that had the highest interhemispheric correlation always attracted the other subject to its level. This is pre-verbal interaction, right? Without verbalization, simply by the sensation of mutual presence, the subject with a low correlation began to increase it, and the one with a high correlation slightly decreased its correlation until they reached an equilibrium. And I think this is very interesting to think about in terms of the relationships between us humans, how we feel about each other, and to what extent someone's unified state changes the environment.
That explored the potential of the brain on a scientific framework. So I think that there may have been interest from these agencies for him to work with them. So my question number 5 is, do you have any idea, or maybe Dr. Hal Puthoff can answer this, or maybe Dr. Russell Tark can answer this, or maybe Dr. Kit Green can answer this. What do you guys know, or do you guys have any idea of what could have happened to him? Or if the nature of this work could have any correlation with his disappearance? I would love to know, because when I saw Mr. James Yandoli from Engage in the Phenomenon talking about these groups that included the Aviary, the Invisible College, and the Advanced Theoretical Physics group, the last one, James says that they had contracts with the government to use secret technology to weaponize things, or weaponize potentially psi abilities. And Dr. Greenberg is famous for working on a lot of this stuff with shamans, with children, at his laboratory in UNAM University in Mexico. So I want to know if you have any idea of what could have happened to him, or if the nature of his work could have any correlation with his disappearance. Those are the 5 questions I have for you, Dr. Jacques Valleé. I certainly hope that you don't take them as offensive in any way, because that is not my intention. I would like, obviously, me and the people that I work with would love some clarity on what happened to the doctor. But more importantly, his family wants clarity. They don't know what happened to him since 1994. And I do think that they deserve to get an answer, or at least a clue, to what could have happened. Some of them even think that he's still alive, working in secret with some of these agencies. And my intention is to just clarify all the conspiracy theories that have been running around his disappearance. I don't think it's fair for the family to still hold some level of hope that they may find out someday what happened. And I do think that based on the investigations and this photographic evidence, maybe you do know something that you may be able to share with us. I certainly hope so. I want to say that I admire your work. I think you are one of the most important voices in this space ever. And I don't know why, if there is this photographic evidence, nobody has ever mentioned the doctor's name. There's so much work he did. There's so many experiments he conducted, scientific experiments, and he repeated them many times that prove that this work has something to it. So what happened? We would love to know. And I hope that you can help us identify what went down, or if you guys know anything about his work, if it has continued after he disappeared. Anything that you can give us will help the case. So there are some recommended videos that I'm gonna leave for people to check out on my channel. I am also going to leave a link to Ida Cuellar's documentary of Dr. Greenberg, and I am going to leave a tweet that I left with all these pictures where I ask the same questions. This is my presentation for Anomacon. I was thinking about what was I going to do when I was approached by Ryan, and I figured that I would just talk about the main case that I've been following for a few years now, and maybe try to get through to Dr. Jacques Valleé, Dr. Hal Puthoff, Dr. Kit Green, Dr. Russell Tark, the people who are still with us that may know what happened to Dr. Greenberg. I want to thank everybody for your attention. I'm just leaving those questions out there for whoever wants to answer them, but especially for these people, these legends in ufology who may or may not know. The truth is out there. Thank you guys. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.